105.5 WDHA here on All Mixed Up on a Sunday morning. I'm Jim Monahan. My guest is Gary Waldman. And before we came on air, Gary and I have kind of known each other without knowing each other, I guess you could say, for a number of different years. And Gary is part of a new project that has just come out. It's a beautiful set. It's called Highway Butterfly, the Songs of Neal Casal. Gary, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on, Jim.
You're very welcome. Neal's music has long been a part of the history here at WDHA. How did you and Neal connect?
Well, we both grew up listening to WDHA. I grew up in Randolph, and Neal grew up in Rockaway. So we were a couple towns apart. And I actually worked very closely with Eddie Trunk. We worked at a record store together as teenagers. Ed eventually went on to work at Megaforce Records, which was home of Metallica and Anthrax, and brought me along there. But when we were working at a record store, it was in Cedar Knolls, Morris County Mall, which was right down the street from DHA. Could actually walk there. And so DHA was, everything to us growing up. And I met Neal in 1987 when he was in his high school hard rock metal band. And his bass player used to shop at the record store, which was called Al Wilk Records. And,
sure, I remember it well.
Yeah. And we became pals, and I went to see their band, and Neal and I just became friends immediately. We actually bonded over a legendary DHA band called Blackfoot, the great Southern rock band who were a DHA staple there in the 70s and 80s. And Neal and I both loved Blackfoot, and that was really the start of our friendship.
Gary, I can't tell you how many times somebody will call up DHA and say, I lived near Ricky
Medlock,
and they give a different town. I think Ricky Medlock lived in every town in Morris County for a period of about 3 years.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And yeah, their legacy here in Morris County was legendary.
Well, they moved up from Florida in the 70s and wanted to be close to New York City to try to get a record deal. And the only place they could afford to live was out in the suburbs in New Jersey. So they lived in Randolph, they lived in Boonton, they lived in Hackettstown. I met so many, subsequently became quite close with Ricky Medlock. And Neal was in Blackfoot from 1988 till 91. The kind of version of the band where their heyday was past, and Ricky was the only original member, but I actually managed to get Neal into that band when he was 18.
What was it about Neal that attracted you the most? Was it the songs? Was it a personality, a combination? What was it, Gary?
I grew up a huge music fan and a musician myself. And when I saw Neal, I was like, wow, this guy plays so great. And he had a voice when I first heard him sing. He reminded me at times of people that I love, like Paul Rodgers from Bad Company or Free. And he loved Keith Richards. And I was just like, this guy's really good. And at that point, I was trying to get into the music industry, either at a record label or as a manager. And I just thought Neal was so good. And then I'd heard some of his early songs, and I just believed in him. And I thought, like, yeah, let's do it. Let's figure out how to make a career for you. And he was ready to do it. He wasn't like, I'm going to go to college. He wasn't like, I'm getting married and having kids. He was all in on music 100% from the day I met him. That was all he wanted to do. I think his one attempt at a day job was tarring driveways in the summer after he graduated high school. That didn't go very well. And after that, it was only music. It was all he did. I never had to get a day job, thankfully.
We're talking with Gary Waldman this morning here at 105.5 WDHA, a longtime friend and manager of Neal Casal, who we sadly lost 2 years ago this past August. And there is a wonderful new 3 CD set, 5 LP as well, Highway Butterfly, the Songs of Neal Casal. How did this project come together, Gary?
It grew out of a tribute concert that we did after Neal died, which was August 26, 2019. I organized a tribute concert from all his friends and band members and people who loved him. And we did it at the Capitol Theater in Port Chester, New York, had about 1,500 people there. And we had 7 hours of music, including Chris Robinson, Steve Earle, Joe Russo's Almost Dead, all kinds of great bands. And it was so much fun to do that. And we had such a lovely community of all of Neal's friends who'd heard about each other, maybe hadn't met each other. And it was just such a great celebration. And the thing is that Neal left so much beautiful music behind. He made 14 solo albums. He wrote songs with Ryan Adams, Chris Robinson, tons of other people. But his solo records, to me, had been sadly overlooked. When we put out his first record was in 1995, actually September 12th, 1995. And he was on the air at DHA on that very day, the album release day. He came there and played in the studio with his band. I think he got interviewed by Terry Carr. And for whatever reason, his solo stuff just never caught on. He had what you would call a cult following, but there's so many incredible songs. And I was just like, we have to get people to cover his songs. So I started asking people who were at that concert, and then just started reaching out to other people, and everybody wanted to be involved. And originally we thought, okay, we'll do 18, 20 songs. Well, it turned into 41 because there were so many people who wanted to do it. And there may be some names on there that you haven't heard of, but they're all connected to Neal. It's a biography in a lot of ways of his friends and family and bandmates and musicians that he loved, all doing his songs. And it's a long record to listen to, but it's just beautiful.
There are some amazing songs on here. Two of my three all-time favorite Neal Casal songs are on here, as a matter of fact. Willow Jane, maybe California, and the third one, and unfortunately it's not on the collection, no one covered Angels on Hold, which I think is probably my all-time favorite song of his.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. I wanted somebody to cover that. I pitched it to a few people, but it didn't get it for whatever reason. I can tell you a story about that song. The original version of it's on Rain, Wind, and Speed, which is his second album, which is an acoustic album. Then it's also on his third album, which is a collection of demos. It's called Field Recordings, demos, live stuff. And we actually recorded it there in Randolph, or Dover, I guess it is, at the Showplace Studios. There's just one morning we went in there and let's cut a band version of this song. And so there's two versions of that song if you dig it out.
There is, I've actually played both versions on the air here on All Mixed Up. The lyrics are haunting. And I don't know too many songs of Neal's that I would describe in that way. Gentle would be the word that comes to mind to me the most, I think, when I think of Neal. But there is something haunting about those lyrics to Angels on Hold. Do you know anything behind the story of that?
You know, there's a lot of his songs that I do know the story behind it. I don't think I do on that one. In that time that he wrote it, 94-ish, I believe he wrote that song. You know, he would have been 25 years old or so. He was just a sensitive dude, and, you know, things that his friends were going through, or if a girlfriend was going through, he could somehow pick up these things and turn it into a song. He was really good at that. But that particular song, I can't tell you any. Here's the key to that one. I don't know.
Gary Waldman, my guest here at 105.5 WDHA on All Mixed Up. And we're talking about the brand new Highway Butterfly, the Songs of Neal Casal collection, coming out on Friday, November 12th. It is a 3 CD, 5 LP set. And there's some amazing musicians on here. Susan and Derek Tedeschi and trucks. My goodness, that's such a gorgeous recording. John Ginty, who we had on a few weeks ago here on DHA, is all over this record as well. What stands out for you the most out of this package, Gary?
Well, on the song side of things, it's so hard to pick favorites because everyone has its own story. Each song has a story and a personal connection with Neal or with me. But the one you just mentioned, Derek and Susan, that one is really special to me. Day in the Sun was the first song on Neal's first album, a really important song to him. And luckily, Derek and Susan, we actually never sent them the album version of the song. I sent them an acoustic demo I had because I didn't want them to have an impression in their head, if they'd never heard that song, what it sounded like. And we sent them that, and they said, well, we're just going to do it, the two of us. And then came back, and it was just like, wow. And there's a lot of stuff like that on there. There's a lot of songs that blown our minds as we were hearing them. And when I say we, I refer to Jim Scott, who was a co-producer and worked on many Neal albums over the years, and of course has worked on Tom Petty, Red Hot Chili Peppers. He's a legendary recording engineer. And the other co-producer was Dave Schools from the band Widespread Panic. And so the three of us masterminded this whole thing. And as we would hear people covering Neal's songs, it was definitely emotional. A lot of the times lyrics that we'd listen to when Neal was alive have a different resonance when somebody's gone. So it was a pretty heavy experience and beautiful. So many great things.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as I've listened to some of the songs here, and you listen to the lyrics. And John had said to me, John Ginty, that looking back, there were signs in the music that Neal was giving out, that there had been a problem, but nobody, I guess, really caught onto it or realized the depth of the issues that Neal was dealing with leading up to his death a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the thing about Neal was that he was not a alcoholic or a drug addict, but he struggled with depression and sadness. And although you would meet him and you wouldn't think that at all, because he was hilarious, personable, great at doing impressions of people, just a great guy to be around. But in the last 3 or 4 years of his life, he really did struggle with depression, I would say, and mental health issues. And it's part of what our mission is with this record and with the foundation, the Neal Casal Music Foundation that we've created, is to try to help other musicians who are struggling and going through things that Neal went through. It's a difficult lifestyle. It's fun when we're all at concerts or listen to music we love on radio. The actual lifestyle of musicians it takes its toll on you, and it's hard to have a normal life. It's hard to keep a marriage together or have kids. And it just, it can wear you out if you don't figure out a way to keep your life in balance. And I think Neal was always good at doing that. But in the last 3 or 4 years, it just got real heavy and hard for him to continue. And at that point, I think it just, I don't know. I mean, he did seek help. He did talk to a lot of people. But in the end, the depression and the mental health issues really, really took him out. I hate to say it. And close friends, I was, one of his closest friends, and many of us who were close friends with him, we'd all talk to him about it, but he'd be like, I'm okay. It's actually all right, And so it's real hard. So what we're trying to do is help other musicians. There's no stigma on getting help or asking for help. If we, through the efforts that we're doing, can raise money to help some other musicians to get through it and to keep giving people like you and I the gift that they have of music, if we can help them through that, that's an amazing thing to do in Neal's honor.
And so you mentioned the foundation, the Neal Casal Music Foundation. It has raised quite a bit of money, as a matter of fact, and also is donating instruments to various schools in the area, which I think is just a wonderful idea to keep Neal's music and his legacy alive, Gary.
Yeah, last week actually we were out there at Jefferson Township High School, and we've also given some instruments to Morris Knowles High School, and we've got a couple more coming up, and we actually focused it quite heavily at the front of it on schools in Morris County, because that's where Neal grew up, just like anybody else who might be young and listening to WDHA. Those songs that you play across the airwaves, I know it's a different world these days because we all have access to songs at our fingertips. But when Neal and I were growing up, DHA was everything. I would tune in to hear new songs. And I just remember, that experience of hearing music on the radio and dreaming about guitars and dreaming about instruments. And I know Neal had the same experience. So for us to be able to walk into a school and say, hey, here's 4 brand new Fender guitars and some amps, and give them to your, the kids that are in your band program, or Jefferson Township had a recording program for some of the best musicians they have there. They're teaching them how to record and how to make all kinds of, studio recordings. So for us to be able to help in Neal's honor is just beautiful. And we're going to keep that going as long as we can.
The website address for that foundation, by the way, is nealcasalmusicfoundation.org. And again, all the proceeds, if I'm not mistaken, all the proceeds from this set
Yep.
Highway Butterfly, the Songs of Neal Casal. It's 5 LP, 3 CDs going to the foundation. And then there's a great story behind the name of your company, Gary, More Barn Music. Tell that story, because it'll sound better coming from you than from me.
Yeah, More Barn. It was actually Neal's name at first. We'd both heard this story. It's a legendary Neil Young story about him recording music out at his ranch in California. So he had a 1,000-acre spectacular, beautiful ranch, and there's a pond out in the middle of it, or a lake. And on one side of the lake is a barn, and the other side is a house. And so he had Graham Nash there, and he said, let's go out on the boat. And he rowed out into the middle of the lake, halfway between the barn and the house. And he waved his hand and signaled at somebody on the beach out by the barn who was controlling the music. And all of a sudden, this loudest music you've ever heard, playing through the woods and playing through the meadows, some mix of something that they were working on. And the engineer yells out, "How is it?" And Neal yells out, "More barn." As the music was a little out of balance, he needed to hear some more barn. So Neal and I just loved that. And the first songs Neal wrote, we had a little publishing company called More Barn, and it eventually became the name of my management company, More Barn.
Gary Waldman, my guest here at 105.5 WDHA, longtime friend and manager of the late Neal Casal. Highway Butterfly, the Songs of Neal Casal. It's a multi-disc set, 3 CDs, 5 LPs. It is out on November 5th, and all of the proceeds going to the Neal Casal Music Foundation. That website, by the way, is nealcasalmusicfoundation.org. Gary, thank you so much for joining me this morning, spending some time talking about Neal Casal, his music, and his legacy here on WDHA.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. And like I said, DHA was so important to Neal and I. I can't even tell you when Neal, as up, 2 years ago, right before Neal died, if I was heading out to New Jersey and you guys were playing something on the radio that I was like, oh my God, DHA is playing Iron Maiden Run to the Hills, I would make a video of it and send it to Neal, like, DHA lives. So we love DHA, and thank you guys for continuing to be the Rock of New Jersey. It's amazing. It's the longest run of a station, not like giving into some awful pop format or whatever you could have become.
We've been very fortunate, Gary, in that we have good management, within the radio station and then above us as well. Obviously, there's a bottom line that we have to reach and all of that, but sure, we've been very, very fortunate from both a local level of management and the corporate level that continues. People say, oh, playlists, this, that, and the other thing, and corporate greed and all that. We've been very fortunate to have an ownership through Greater Media and now Beasley that allows us to continue to do what we do and make the connection that you've referred to, which I think is so important for local radio. You can talk about how many different ways we have of getting music these days, but there's nothing quite like hearing it on the radio. You call up the request line and that DJ plays that song that you want to hear. Or, in the case of an artist, Neal hearing one of his songs on the radio. There's nothing quite like local radio to accomplish that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I feel fortunate to have grown up listening to such a great station. And to me, it hasn't changed. I mean, it's the same kind of station that it always was. And that makes me so happy thinking of all the stations that we both know who have been through 10 different format changes over the last 20 years, probably. So God bless WDHA.